A dog kept barking in front of a veteran's coffin, and no one could understand why. At first, everyone thought it was grief, until the barking wouldn't stop. Even the widow begged for the dog to be taken away. But when one quiet onlooker noticed the scratches on the coffin and the strange smell drifting from it, everything changed. What was supposed to be a peaceful funeral suddenly turned into a terrifying mystery. The dog wasn't mourning. It was warning. What secret was being buried that day? And how far would someone go to make sure the truth stayed underground? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late autumn wind whistled through the cemetery's oak trees, scattering golden leaves across the precisely arranged rows of white headstones. Maren Kepler stood at a respectful distance from the gathering, her groundskeeper's uniform crisp despite the morning's work. Her eyes tracked the movement of the flag-draped coffin as the Marine Honor Guard carried it with measured steps toward the burial site. The deceased, Staff Sergeant Harlan Voss, was to be laid to rest with full military honors. Maren noticed his widow, Sabine Voss, clutching a folded flag to her chest, her face pale and drawn. Behind her stood Luther Crane, the funeral director, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief despite the cool weather. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to protocol until a powerful bark split the solemn silence. A large German shepherd, with graying fur around his muzzle, suddenly broke free from his handler's grip. Buck, the sergeant's former military dog, charged toward the coffin, his barks becoming more frantic with each step. "Someone control that animal," Luther Crane called out, his voice shrill with barely contained panic. But Buck wouldn't be silenced. He circled the coffin, nose twitching, barking with increasing urgency. Maren's EMT training kicked in. She'd learned to trust animals' instincts during her years of service. Something about Buck's behavior seemed more than simple grief. Moving closer, Maren noticed details that made her pulse quicken. There were unusual scratches on the coffin's polished surface, not the typical handling marks she'd seen countless times before. As she approached, a peculiar sweetness tinged the air, chemical and out of place among the autumn leaves and fresh-turned earth. "Please remove that dog immediately," Sabine Voss demanded, her voice trembling. "This is hard enough without—" Buck's barking reached a fever pitch as the Marine Honor Guard prepared to position themselves for the rifle salute. The dog's agitation was infectious, spreading unease through the gathered mourners. Several people shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the distraught animal and the coffin. Maren felt the weight of professional responsibility settle on her shoulders. She'd seen too many warning signs to remain silent. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "I apologize for the interruption, but I need to request a delay in this proceeding." Luther Crane's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening. "This is completely inappropriate. There are irregularities that need to be addressed," Maren continued firmly. "As cemetery groundskeeper, I'm required to ensure all proper procedures are followed." She gestured to the gouges on the coffin. "These marks are unusual, and there's an atypical odor that needs to be investigated before we continue." The Marine Honor Guard remained at attention, but their eyes darted uncertainly between Maren and their commanding officer. The mourners began to murmur, and Sabine Voss swayed slightly where she stood. "This is outrageous," Luther Crane blustered, moving to stand between Maren and the coffin. "Everything is in order. I personally oversaw—" Buck's barking cut him off, the sound now carrying a note of warning that made several people step back. The German shepherd planted himself firmly beside the coffin, his scarred flank rigid with tension. Maren stood her ground, meeting Luther's gaze steadily. "Sir, I understand this is difficult, but I cannot in good conscience allow this burial to proceed until these concerns are addressed. It's a matter of safety and proper protocol. The tension in the air was palpable. The crisp autumn day that should have honored a fallen soldier had become something else entirely. A moment of questioning, of discord, of buried truths struggling to surface. Among the headstones that surrounded them, Maren felt the weight of her duty not just to the living, but to the dead. Sabine Voss's voice cut through the tension, barely above a whisper. What are you saying?" "Ma'am," Maren said gently, turning to the widow, "I'm saying that something isn't right here, and we need to make sure everything is properly handled for your husband's sake." The Marine commander stepped forward, his face grave. "Given the concerns raised, we'll need to suspend the ceremony pending investigation." He nodded to his men, who lowered their rifles. Luther Crane's face had grown increasingly red. "This is completely unnecessary. You're causing undue distress to the family based on nothing more than a dog's behavior and some routine handling marks." But even as he spoke, Buck's persistent barking seemed to underscore the wrongness of the situation. The German shepherd's intelligent eyes never left the coffin, his posture speaking of years of training and unwavering certainty. Maren watched as confusion and fear played across the faces of the gathered mourners. Some began to back away, while others pressed forward, drawn by the growing sense that something significant was unfolding. The Marine Honor Guard maintained their disciplined stance, but their expressions had shifted from ceremonial solemnity to alert watchfulness. Through it all, Buck continued his vigilant warning, his barks echoing across the cemetery grounds. The sound carried both grief and purpose, the last duty of a loyal companion trying to protect his partner, even after death. Sabine Voss sank onto one of the chairs that had been set up for the service, still clutching the folded flag. Her face had gone from pale to ashen, and something like recognition flickered in her eyes as she watched Buck's determined defense of the coffin. The autumn wind picked up, sending more leaves skating across the ground between the headstones. The flag draping the coffin stirred, and the chemical sweetness in the air seemed to grow stronger, impossible to ignore now that Maren had called attention to it. "We need to contact the proper authorities," Maren said firmly, addressing the Marine commander. "Until then, this area needs to be secured." The commander nodded sharply and began issuing quiet orders to his men. Luther Crane stood with his mouth opening and closing, looking like a man watching his carefully constructed plans crumble before his eyes. What had begun as a solemn ceremony of remembrance had transformed into something else entirely, a moment of disruption that would ripple out far beyond this quiet corner of the cemetery. As Maren watched Buck maintain his protective stance beside the coffin, she knew that her decision to speak up had set something significant in motion. The morning's crisp certainty had given way to questions that demanded answers, and the truth that Buck seemed to sense beneath the polished surface of the coffin would not remain buried. In following her conscience and trusting her instincts, Maren had ensured that Staff Sergeant Harlan Voss's final journey would not end here, not until the full story was known. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as the last of the mourners departed. Maren stood near the maintenance shed, watching people shake their heads and whisper as they passed. Their disapproving glances felt like tiny paper cuts, not deadly, but stinging all the same. Luther Crane approached her with measured steps, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. His earlier fluster had hardened into something cold and professional. "Miss Kepler," he said, voice low and controlled, "I hope you understand the gravity of what you've done today." Maren met his gaze steadily. "I understand my responsibilities to this cemetery and to the families we serve, Mr. Crane." "Do you?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive aftershave. Because what I saw today was a groundskeeper overstepping her bounds and causing unnecessary pain to a grieving family. That's not service. That's disruption. I saw irregularities that needed to be addressed, Marin replied, keeping her voice even. The scratches on that coffin were completely normal handling marks, Crane cut in. His face had grown flushed again. You'd know that if you stuck to maintaining the grounds instead of playing detective. He straightened his tie, composing himself. Consider this a warning, Miss Kepler. Know your place. The threat hung in the air between them as he turned and walked away, leaving Marin alone with the weight of her decision. She busied herself with end-of-day tasks, trying to quiet the doubts that crept in with the evening shadows. Buck had been right. She felt it in her bones. But standing up for what was right didn't make the aftermath any easier to bear. Hours later, with the cemetery gates locked and the office closed, Marin was finishing up paperwork in the maintenance building when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a broad-shouldered man with an unkempt beard standing there, wearing a worn military jacket that seemed a size too large. "Are you Marin Kepler?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm Rowan Voss, Harlan's brother." Marin's heart jumped, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Voss, I'm so sorry about this morning." "Don't be," he interrupted, running a hand through his hair. "I need to show you something." He pulled out his phone with slightly trembling hands. "This is why I wasn't at the funeral. I couldn't face it until I figured this out." He pressed play on a voicemail, and Harlan Voss's voice filled the small office. "Hey, little brother. Listen, if anything happens to me, check my locker. Unit 17, Riverside Storage. You'll know what to look for." There was a pause, then, "I love you, man. I should have said that more." Marin watched as Rowan struggled to compose himself. The message was heavy with unspoken meaning, laden with a brother's final attempt to bridge a gap that death had made permanent. "When was this?" she asked softly. 3 weeks ago," Rowan replied, pocketing the phone. "Right after his last guard training weekend. He'd been working with Bracket Solutions. They were testing new equipment. He came back different. Worried." He looked at her intently. "That dog today, Buck, he knew something was wrong. Just like Harlan knew something was wrong." Marin leaned against her desk, processing this new information. "What happened during the training?" "Harlan never gave me details, said it was classified. But he was asking questions about chemical compounds, safety protocols." Rowan's voice grew bitter. "Next thing we know, there's a training accident. And now this burial that feels all wrong." As if summoned by their conversation, a scratch at the door announced Buck's presence. The German shepherd had somehow slipped away from whoever was watching him, drawn back to the place where he'd sensed something amiss. His intelligent eyes moved between Marin and Rowan, and his tail gave a single, serious wag. Marin felt the weight of the moment settling around them. "Mr. Voss." "Rowan," he corrected. "Rowan," she amended. "I can help you look into the burial, make sure everything's legal and proper. But that's all I can promise." He nodded, understanding the careful boundary she was drawing. "That's all I'm asking. Harlan deserves that much, to be buried honest, if nothing else." Buck moved to sit between them, his presence somehow making their unlikely alliance feel more real. His posture remained vigilant, as if he was still on duty, still protecting his partner in whatever way he could. "Tomorrow," Marin said, reaching down to pat Buck's head. "We'll start with the storage locker tomorrow. I have access to the burial documents here. I can review those tonight." Rowan pulled out a key ring, removed a single key. "Unit 17, he said, holding it out. "I haven't been there yet. Couldn't do it alone." As Marin took the key, their eyes met in silent understanding. This wasn't about chasing conspiracies or playing heroes. It was about duty, about doing right by a man who might have died trying to do the same. Buck's tail thumped against the floor, once, twice. His ears were perked forward, his bearing almost hopeful. In the growing darkness outside, crickets began their evening song, a reminder that life went on, that time was passing, that tomorrow would bring whatever truth they were meant to find. "I'll need to document everything properly," Marin said, already thinking like the methodical EMT she'd once been. "Photos, notes, everything by the book." "Harlan would have liked that," Rowan said softly. "He was always about doing things right, following procedure." His voice caught slightly, even when I thought he was being too rigid about it. The regret in his tone was palpable, speaking of arguments never resolved, of words left unsaid. Buck whined softly and pressed against Rowan's leg, offering comfort with an instinct that transcended species. "We'll do this right," Marin assured him, her quiet determination filling the small office. "Whatever we find, we'll handle it properly." As Rowan turned to leave, Buck rose and moved to follow him, then hesitated, looking back at Marin. After a moment's consideration, the dog settled back down near her desk, as if he'd appointed himself guardian of their nascent investigation. "He trusts you," Rowan observed, something like hope flickering across his tired features. That means something. Harlan always said Buck was the best judge of character he'd ever known. Marin watched them go, Rowan's broad shoulders squared against the weight he carried, Buck's vigilant presence a reminder of all they'd witnessed that day. The key to Unit 17 felt heavy in her hand, a tangible link to whatever truth lay waiting to be discovered. She turned back to her desk, pulled out a fresh notebook, and began to write. Whatever came next, it would start here, with careful notes, with attention to detail, with respect for both the living and the dead. As she worked, Buck settled in to watch, his steady breathing becoming a kind of metronome, marking time as she documented the first steps of what they'd begun. The morning sun cast long shadows across the storage facility as Marin pulled into the graveled lot. Row after row of identical metal units stretched before her, their orange doors collecting dew in the early light. She checked the unit number again. 17. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she spotted Rowan's truck already parked nearby. Buck sat alertly beside Rowan, his gray muzzle lifted to catch the morning breeze. The dog's ears perked up at Marin's approach, and his tail gave a single, purposeful wag. Something about his presence made this feel more official, as if they had a proper investigative team. "Morning," Rowan said, his voice rough with lack of sleep. He wore the same jacket as yesterday, and Marin noticed now that it was slightly too large. Harlan's, she realized. The thought squeezed at her heart. "Good morning," she replied, pulling out her phone and a small notebook. "I brought supplies for documenting everything." She held up a digital camera as well. "We should photograph anything important." Rowan nodded, approval flickering across his tired features. Harlan would have done the same. He was always thorough about records. The key slid into the lock with a metallic scrape. The door groaned as they lifted it, revealing a space that smelled of motor oil and dust. Harlan's truck sat centered in the unit, a blue tarp draped over its bed. Tools lined one wall on a pegboard, each outline carefully marked in black marker. Buck moved forward purposefully, his nose working the air. He circled the truck once, then stopped at a large red toolbox sitting on a workbench. His tail went still, and he looked back at them expectantly. "That's his main kit," Rowan said softly. "He took it everywhere during training weekends." Marin approached the toolbox, her EMT training kicking in as she mentally catalogued everything she observed. The dust pattern was different here. Someone had handled this recently. Her fingers found the latches, and she carefully opened the top. Socket wrenches lay in precise rows, each size marked. Everything was organized with military precision. But Buck wasn't interested in the tools. He nosed at the bottom of the box insistently. Rowan leaned in closer. Wait, there's something... His fingers found a slight gap in the metal. A false bottom. The hidden compartment lifted away to reveal a manila envelope. Marin's hands were steady as she opened it, but her heart was pounding. Inside, she found several typed pages, crisp and official-looking. The heading made her breath catch. Misfires, Bracket Solutions. What is it? Rowan asked, moving to read over her shoulder. The document was meticulously organized. Dates lined the left margin, each followed by serial numbers and brief notes. Marin's eyes caught phrases like premature detonation and chemical residue inconsistent with specs. He was tracking something, she said, spreading the papers carefully on the workbench. Look, these dates go back 6 months. Rowan's face darkened as he read. Defective munitions. He was building a case. His hands clenched at his sides. That last voicemail, he was trying to tell me. Buck sat beside them, his posture alert and serious. His earlier agitation made more sense now. If there had been chemical residue on the munitions Harlan was investigating, the dog's trained nose would have detected similar compounds at the funeral. Marin began photographing each page methodically, making sure the images were clear and complete. This is serious evidence, she said. We need to take this to the proper authorities. County level, Rowan agreed. Harlan wouldn't want us going off half-cocked. He'd want it done right. As they carefully returned the papers to their hiding place, Marin noticed Rowan's hands shaking slightly. She understood. This wasn't just evidence anymore. This was proof that Harlan had been onto something real, something potentially dangerous. We should document the whole unit, she said, giving him a moment to compose himself. Her camera clicked steadily as she photographed the layout of the space, the tools, the truck, everything that might matter later. Buck moved between them as they worked, his presence both comforting and purposeful. He'd known something was wrong at the funeral, and now they knew why. His training had cut through the confusion, pointing them toward the truth. I kept telling myself I was crazy, Rowan said suddenly, his voice rough. That I was just looking for something to blame. But Harlan knew. He knew something wasn't right, and he was trying to fix it. Marin paused in her documentation to look at him. That's why we're going to do this properly. Follow the evidence. Take it to the right people. She glanced at her photos, checking their quality. We owe him that much. They spent another hour going through the unit methodically, but found no other hidden documents. Finally, Marin felt satisfied they'd been thorough. As they pulled the door down and locked it, the morning sun had climbed higher, burning off the last of the dew. The county courthouse opens at 8 o'clock, Marin said, checking her watch. We should have time to organize these photos and make copies of everything before we go. Rowan nodded, then reached down to scratch behind Buck's ears. Good boy, he said softly. You knew all along, didn't you? The dog leaned into his touch, and for a moment Marin saw the ghost of a smile cross Rowan's face, the first she'd seen. It was a small thing, but it felt like progress, like hope. As they walked back to their vehicles, Marin felt the weight of what they'd discovered settling around them. The memo changed everything. This wasn't just about a suspicious burial anymore. It was about justice, about finishing what Harlan had started. Buck jumped into Rowan's truck with the efficiency of long practice, but his eyes stayed on Marin until she got into her own car. She could feel the shift in their purpose, the way suspicion had crystallized into certainty. They had proof now, and with it, a clear path forward. The morning traffic was just beginning to build as they pulled out of the storage facility, heading towards the courthouse. Marin watched Rowan's truck in her rearview mirror, Buck's silhouette visible in the passenger seat. They were an unlikely team, a groundskeeper, a grieving brother, and a retired military dog. But maybe that's exactly what this situation needed. She thought about the memo, safely photographed and documented, about Harlan's methodical notes and dates, about Buck's unwavering instincts. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture that demanded attention. Now they just had to make sure the right people saw it, too. The county courthouse loomed ahead, its red brick facade catching the morning sun. Marin parked her car in the visitor's lot, watching as Rowan pulled in beside her, Buck's alert face visible through the passenger window. "Remember," Marin said as they met at the building's entrance, "we need to be calm and professional. Let the evidence speak for itself." Rowan nodded, though his jaw was tight. He carried a manila folder containing their printed photos and copies of Harlan's documents. Buck padded between them, his posture military straight. The clerk at the records department looked up as they approached, her expression shifting from bored to wary at the sight of Buck. "Service animal?" she asked, reaching for a form. "Former military K-9, Rowan explained. "He's well trained." The clerk's lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll need to fill out these forms first." She pulled out a stack of papers. "And provide proper identification." Marin stepped forward. "We're here about Staff Sergeant Harlan Voss's death certificate and burial permit. There are some irregularities we need to report." "Death certificates are handled through Vital Statistics," the clerk said, pointing to a directory on the wall. "Third floor, but you'll need authorization from next of kind." "I am next of kin," Rowan said. "I'm his brother." More forms appeared. The clerk explained the process: verification of identity, notarized statements, official requests that would take weeks to process. Each step seemed designed to exhaust their patience. An hour passed. They moved from desk to desk, department to department. Their evidence remained sealed in the manila folder, unopened. Buck sat quietly, but his ears stayed perked, tracking movement in the hallways. "This isn't getting us anywhere," Rowan muttered as they waited in yet another line. "They're just pushing paper at us." Before Marin could respond, a new voice cut through the bureaucratic hum. "Mr. Voss? Ms. Kepler?" They turned to find a tall man in an expensive suit approaching. His silver hair was perfectly trimmed, and his bearing spoke of military training turned corporate polish. Buck's hackles rose slightly. "Colonel Royce Daltrey," he introduced himself, extending a manicured hand. "Retired. Now with Brackett Solutions. I heard you were making inquiries about Harlan's case." Marin watched his face carefully as she shook his hand. His smile was practiced, his grip carefully calibrated to convey both strength and restraint. "We have concerns about the circumstances of my brother's death," Rowan said stiffly. "Of course you do," Daltrey's voice was smooth with rehearsed sympathy. "Losing Harlan was a terrible blow to all of us at Brackett. He was an exemplary guardsman." Buck moved closer to Marin's side, a low growl building in his throat. Daltrey's eyes flickered to the dog, then back to them, his smile never wavering. "However," he continued, "I must caution you about pursuing unauthorized investigations. Accessing military equipment without proper clearance, even if it belonged to a family member, could expose you to serious legal complications." Rowan's face flushed. "Are you threatening us?" "Not at all." Daltrey spread his hands in a gesture of openness that felt calculated. "I'm here to help. Brackett takes safety very seriously. Our products undergo rigorous testing. Any suggestion of defects would need to be thoroughly documented through proper channels. "We have documentation," Marin said quietly, watching his reaction. Something flickered behind Daltrey's eyes, sharp and cold, before his professional mask slipped back into place. "Anything related to our products or testing protocols would be classified. Possession of such materials without authorization would be problematic." The threat was clear beneath the polite corporate speak. Marin felt Buck press against her leg, his body tense. "Now," Daltrey pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. "I suggest we handle this through appropriate channels. My office can assist with any questions you have about Harlan's service." "Your office?" Rowan's voice was tight with anger. "Or your lawyers?" Daltrey's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We all want the same thing here, to honor Harlan's memory properly, within established protocols, of course." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Miss Kepler. I understand you raised concerns at the funeral. While your dedication to procedure is admirable, interfering with a military burial service could be seen as disrespecting a fallen soldier. I'm sure that wasn't your intent." Buck's growl grew louder. Daltrey glanced at the dog, then nodded pleasantly. "Good day to you both." They watched him walk away, his shoes clicking precisely on the polished floor. The courthouse suddenly felt colder, more hostile. "He knew we were coming," Marin said softly. "They were ready for us." Rowan's hands were clenched at his sides. "This isn't just some mistake, is it? They're covering something up. And they're good at it." Marin looked at the endless forms on the counter, the maze of departments and procedures. "We're not going to get anywhere through official channels." "So what do we do?" Marin watched a family passing through security, their voices echoing in the marble hallway. Everything here was about control, controlling access, controlling narrative, controlling truth. "We need leverage," she said finally. "Something they can't bury in paperwork or threaten away. We need proof they can't deny." Buck had settled, but his eyes remained fixed on the direction Daltrey had gone. His earlier behavior at the funeral made more sense now. He'd recognized something dangerous, something wrong. "Come on," Marin gathered their unopened folder. "We're wasting our time here." As they walked back to their cars, the morning sun had turned harsh and glaring. Daltrey's business card sat untouched on the counter behind them, a reminder that they were now playing a bigger, more dangerous game. Rowan helped Buck into his truck, then turned to Marin. "I knew they'd push back, but this—" "They're organized," Marin said. "This isn't just local anymore. Whatever Harlan found, it goes all the way up." She thought about Daltrey's perfectly constructed presence, the way he'd wielded policy like a weapon. They couldn't fight that kind of institutional power head-on. They needed a different approach. Buck watched them from the truck window, his posture still alert despite the morning's frustrations. He'd known the truth from the start, Marin realized. While they'd been looking for procedures and permissions, he'd cut straight through to the heart of things. Maybe it was time they followed his lead. Marin sat in her truck, staring at her phone. Dr. Sarah Chen's number glowed on the screen, a connection from her EMT days. The medical examiner had always been thorough, honest, and most importantly, unmoved by political pressure. She pressed dial before doubt could stop her. "Dr. Chen's office," a crisp voice answered. "This is Marin Kepler. I need to speak with Dr. Chen about requesting a burial hold." There was a pause. "One moment." Marin drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, watching Buck in the rearview mirror. He sat perfectly still in Rowan's truck behind her, eyes fixed forward like he was on duty. "Marin?" Dr. Chen's familiar voice came through. "It's been a while." "I need your help, Sarah. It's about Staff Sergeant Harlan Voss's burial." "The military funeral from yesterday? What's wrong?" Marin explained everything. The coffin marks, Buck's behavior, the memo they'd found, and Daltrey's veiled threats. Dr. Chen listened without interruption. "A burial hold is serious," she said finally. "I'll need documented cause. I can provide photos of the coffin damage and the memo, plus I have my original incident report from the funeral. Send everything. I'll review it personally." Dr. Chen's tone was professional but kind. "If there's sufficient cause, I can issue a 30-day hold for forensic review." "Thank you." Marin felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I knew I could count on you." "Don't thank me yet. This won't be easy, especially with a corporation involved." A pause. "Be careful, Marin. These situations can get complicated fast." After hanging up, Marin texted Rowan. "Medical examiner on board. Your turn." She watched him read the message in his truck, then make his own call. Buck's ears perked up as Rowan spoke, like he was following the conversation. 20 minutes later, they met in a quiet coffee shop away from the courthouse. Rowan looked more hopeful than he had all morning. "Deputy Mike Torres," he said, sliding into the booth. "We served together in the Guard before he joined the sheriff's department. He's willing to help." "Can we trust him?" "With my life. He respected Harlan. Knows he wasn't careless." Rowan wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "Torres can expedite the exhumation request once we have the medical hold. Keep it quiet, local." Buck lay under their table, his chin on his paws but his eyes alert. Every time someone walked past, his head would turn slightly, tracking them. Marin pulled out her tablet, opening a blank document. "Okay, let's do this right. We need to document everything. Build an airtight case." They spent the next hour crafting their approach. Marin's EMT training helped structure their observations clinically. Rowan's military background added precise details about munitions testing protocols. "We keep it simple," Marin said, reviewing their notes. "Focus on physical evidence and procedural concerns. Nothing speculative." "Torres says that's smart. Harder to dismiss facts than theories." Rowan ran a hand through his hair. "He also suggested we get the cemetery's cooperation lined up before filing. Show we've got all our ducks in a row." Marin nodded. "I can handle that. My supervisor will back me. He's big on proper procedure." They drove to the cemetery office, where Marin's supervisor, Carl, reviewed their documentation. His weathered face grew serious as he read. "This is properly done," he said finally. "You've got your timelines, your chain of custody, everything documented. I'll authorize a 48-hour window for examination once you have the orders." "Thank you, Carl." He looked at them over his reading glasses. "Just watch yourselves. Corporate folks play rough when pushed." Back outside, Marin and Rowan compared notes on their phones. Dr. Chen had received their evidence package. Deputy Torres was preparing the paperwork. "Now we wait," Marin said, but her voice was steadier than before. They had a plan, a process, people they could trust. Buck had been calm throughout their cemetery visit, but his posture remained vigilant. As they walked past Harlan's grave, his ears flattened slightly. That same alert reaction he'd shown to the coffin, the toolkit, anything connected to his former handler. "He knows," Rowan said softly, watching the dog. "He's been trying to tell us from the start." Marin knelt beside Buck, scratching behind his ears. He leaned into her touch, but kept his eyes on the grave. "We're going to fix this," she told him. "We're going to do it right." They spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing details. Marin updated her incident report with new observations. Rowan gathered his National Guard service records to establish his standing in the case. Dr. Chen called as the sun was setting. "I've reviewed everything. There's sufficient cause for concern. I'm issuing the hold first thing tomorrow." How long will we have? 30 days. Make them count. She paused. The corporate lawyers will fight this. Be ready. Deputy Torres's update came minutes later through Rowan. He'd have the exhumation request ready to file as soon as the hold was registered. They met one last time in the cemetery parking lot, going over their timeline. Everything was in place. Medical hold, law enforcement support, cemetery cooperation, documented evidence. It feels strange, Rowan said, looking toward his brother's grave in the gathering dusk. Using all this official process when we know something's wrong. That's exactly why we need it, Marin replied. They're counting on pressure and threats to stop us, but they can't fight their own procedures if we follow them perfectly. Buck stood between them, his posture straight and focused despite the long day. He'd shown them the truth from the beginning. Now they had a legitimate way to prove it. Tomorrow, they'd take their first real step toward answers. For now, they had done everything they could to build a foundation that could withstand what was coming. Marin watched Rowan and Buck drive away, then sat in her truck for a long moment. The cemetery was peaceful in the evening light, but she knew that peace was temporary. They'd chosen this path carefully, built it step by step with procedure and documentation. Now they just had to walk it. The morning air hung heavy with dew as Marin arrived at the cemetery. Deputy Torres's patrol car was already parked near the maintenance shed, its lights off but engine running against the early chill. Dr. Chen, the medical examiner, stood beside her van, reviewing papers on a clipboard. Marin pulled on her work gloves, more for comfort than necessity. Her hands needed something familiar to do. Buck sat in the back of Rowan's truck, unusually still, his eyes fixed on the grave they would soon open. "Everyone ready?" Deputy Torres asked, his voice low but official. He held a thick folder of documents, their protection against what they might find. Dr. Chen nodded, adjusting her protective mask. "Let's proceed by the book. Photos first, then systematic excavation." The cemetery's backhoe operator, Jim, started the machine with a rumble that seemed too loud for the quiet morning. Marin had worked with him for 3 years. Today, his usual easy manner was replaced by professional focus. "Rowan?" Marin touched his arm. He stood rigid, staring at the grave marker. "You don't have to watch this part." "Yes, I do." His voice was rough. "I owe him that much." They documented everything, the intact seal on the vault, the position of the earth they removed. Dr. Chen photographed each layer as they proceeded, marking time and depth in her log. When they reached the vault, Torres radioed confirmation to dispatch. "Beginning vault removal at 7:45 a.m. The mechanical lift whined as it raised the concrete lid. More photos, more measurements. Buck whined once, sharp and clear in the morning air. "Recording vault condition," Dr. Chen announced, her camera clicking. "No signs of external tampering or damage." Marin felt the shift in the air when they opened the casket. That same sweet, chemical smell she'd noticed at the funeral, stronger now. Dr. Chen's head tilted slightly. She'd caught it too. "Note unusual odor," she said into her recorder. "Time is 7:58 a.m. Rowan made a sound in his throat when they saw Harlan. His brother lay in full dress uniform, hands folded properly, everything in place except documenting granular residue on the uniform, Dr. Chen said, swabbing samples into evidence vials, particularly concentrated around the chest and shoulders. Marin leaned closer, her EMT training kicking in. The wound pattern on Harlan's chest didn't match the report's description. A self-inflicted discharge would have... "Dr. Chen?" She kept her voice steady. "The angle of impact appears inconsistent with the official cause." The medical examiner nodded, photographing from multiple angles. "Noted. Injury pattern suggests discharge from approximately 3 to 4 feet distance. Not contact range as reported. Rowan's hands clenched at his sides. He wouldn't have... Focus on the process, Marin said quietly. Help us document everything. He took a deep breath, then pulled out his phone to take his own photos. His hands shook slightly, but his military training showed in how he captured every detail systematically. Testing residue now, Dr. Chen announced, applying a chemical strip to one of her samples. She frowned at the result. Unusual composition. This needs lab analysis. They heard a car approaching fast on the gravel road. Luther Crane's sedan pulled up, brakes squealing slightly. He practically jumped out, his face flushed. "This is completely against policy," he shouted, waving a handful of papers. "I have explicit instructions about procedure and—" "Sir?" Deputy Torres stepped between Crane and the grave. "We have a valid court order and medical examiner supervision. Please step back." "You don't understand," Crane insisted, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning. "There are liability issues, protocols." "Which we're following exactly," Torres said firmly. "You're welcome to observe, but do not interfere with this examination." Buck growled low in his throat. Crane glanced at the dog and took 2 steps back, his hands shaking slightly as he stuffed his papers back in his pocket. Dr. Chen continued her examination, calling out observations for her recorder. Multiple impact points inconsistent with single discharge. Residue pattern suggests close range but not contact. Tissue damage indicates... Marin watched Crane during the findings. His face grew paler with each observation that contradicted the official report. He kept checking his phone, typing rapid messages. "Completing photographic documentation," Dr. Chen announced. "Deputy Torres, please verify chain of custody forms." They worked through the paperwork methodically. Everything logged, witnessed, and signed. Multiple copies. Digital backups. No procedural gaps for anyone to exploit. "Preparing to reseal," Torres announced at last. "Final photographs?" Dr. Chen did one more sweep with her camera, then nodded. "Documentation complete." As they carefully closed the casket, Marin felt the weight of what they'd discovered. The evidence didn't prove everything, but it proved enough. The official story was wrong. Deliberately wrong. Rowan stood very still, looking at the casket that held his brother. He was trying to tell us something, about the munitions testing, about Brackett. "And now we have proof something's not right," Marin said quietly. "Real proof, documented and official." They watched as the vault was resealed, the earth carefully replaced. Jim smoothed the ground with practiced skill, leaving no sign they'd been there except the slightly darker soil. Crane had retreated to his car but hadn't left, alternating between angry phone calls and anxious watching. His presence reminded them that others were already moving to counter what they'd found. Dr. Chen packed her samples carefully in sealed containers. "I'll have preliminary results in 48 hours. Deputy Torres will maintain evidence security." Torres nodded. "I'm logging everything into the system immediately. Multiple backups." They'd done everything by the book. Multiple witnesses, proper documentation, official channels. But Marin felt a new tension in the air, the weight of proof that couldn't be easily dismissed. Buck finally relaxed his alert posture, moving to lean against Rowan's leg. He'd known all along. Now they had evidence to support what his instincts had told them. "Thank you," Rowan said quietly to everyone, "for doing this right, for seeing the truth about my brother." Marin watched Dr. Chen's van pull away, followed by Torres's patrol car. The morning sun had burned off the dew, but she still felt a chill. They'd crossed a line today, moving from suspicion to documented fact. Someone had tried to bury the truth with Harlan. Now that truth had light and air and official record. The kind of truth people might kill to keep quiet. Crane's car peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying. More calls to make, more damage to control. But he was too late. The evidence was secure, the documentation complete. They had proof. Now they had to survive using it. The storage facility's security lights cast long shadows across the pavement as Marin pulled into the lot that evening. Her hands were still shaking slightly from their morning discovery at the cemetery. Rowan's truck rumbled in behind her, Buck's silhouette visible in the passenger seat. "We need to get everything copied tonight," Rowan said as he climbed out, his voice tight with urgency. "After what we found this morning, I don't trust that anything's safe anymore." Marin nodded, pulling out her phone's flashlight. The metal storage units stretched in identical rows, their roll-up doors reflecting dull orange from the security lights. Unit 217's padlock clicked open under Rowan's key. Buck padded in first, his nails clicking on the concrete floor. The unit smelled musty and metallic, crammed with boxes of Harlan's belongings and military gear. Marin's flashlight beam caught dust motes dancing in the air. "Here." Rowan pulled out a metal filing box. "Harlan kept carbon copies of everything. Training logs, equipment reports, maintenance records." They settled into a rhythm, Marin photographing documents while Rowan sorted through the files, Buck a watchful presence at their feet. The evening air grew cooler, carrying the scent of approaching rain. A sudden gust whipped through the unit. The door slammed shut behind them with a metallic bang that made them jump. Marin's nose wrinkled at a sharp, chemical smell that hadn't been there moments before. "Do you smell that?" she asked, turning toward Rowan. Buck's head snapped up, a low whine building in his throat. Before either of them could move, orange flames erupted along the back wall, racing up toward the ceiling with unnatural speed. "Get out!" Marin screamed, lunging for the main door. The handle was stuck, the metal already hot to the touch. Smoke began filling the small space, acrid and thick. Buck barked frantically, spinning in circles as the fire spread with terrifying speed. The heat built rapidly, turning the storage unit into an oven. Sweat poured down Marin's face as she scanned desperately for another way out. There! She spotted a smaller roll-up access panel on the side wall, meant for maintenance. "Rowan, help me!" They scrambled toward it together, choking on the smoke. Rowan grabbed the latch with both hands, muscles straining as he forced it upward. The metal shrieked in protest. "It's stuck!" He coughed violently, eyes streaming. The flames had reached the ceiling now, dropping burning debris around them. Buck pushed between them, pawing at the bottom edge where a small gap had opened. Marin dropped to her knees, ignoring the searing heat of the floor as she dug her fingers under the panel. "Pull harder," she gasped. Rowan threw his whole body into it. With a tortured screech, the panel jerked upward a few more inches. Marin could see the parking lane beyond, tantalizingly close. "Buck, go!" She pushed the dog toward the opening. He squeezed through, whimpering. Marin followed, the rough metal edge tearing at her jacket as she writhed through the gap. "Rowan!" She reached back through, grabbing his arm. He was doubled over, coughing, but he pushed forward, scraping through the opening just as a deafening pop came from inside the unit. "Propane tank!" he shouted. "Run!" They scrambled away on hands and knees as a second explosion rocked the storage unit. The force threw them forward. Marin's shoulder slammed into a concrete barrier, and she pulled Rowan behind it with her. Buck pressed against them, trembling. The heat was intense even from behind the berm. Flames roared out of the unit's seams, reaching for the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. Marin's lungs burned with every breath. Her hands were scraped raw, and she could smell singed hair. Beside her, Rowan was still coughing violently, his face streaked with soot. "They tried to kill us," he choked out. "They actually tried to burn us alive." The reality of it hit Marin like a physical blow. This wasn't just about documents anymore. Someone had rigged that unit to burn, knowing they would come back for the files. Someone had been willing to murder them to keep Harlan's evidence from coming out. "We need to move," she said, her voice raspy from the smoke. "We're too exposed here." They stumbled to their feet, supporting each other as they made their way to the parking lot's edge. Buck stayed close, hackles still raised as he watched the burning unit. The sirens were getting closer. Soon the lot would be swarming with firefighters and police, but Marin knew this wasn't an accident to be investigated. This was a message, written in flames: back off or burn. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she pulled out her keys. "We can't go home. They know where to find us now." Rowan nodded grimly, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. "I know somewhere we can go. Somewhere Harlan told me about just in case." They climbed into their vehicles as the first fire truck rounded the corner, lights painting the smoke-filled sky in red pulses. Marin's throat ached, and every breath reminded her how close they'd come to death. The truth about Harlan had nearly cost them their lives tonight. But as she followed Rowan's truck away from the inferno, Marin knew they couldn't stop now. Someone had murdered a soldier to keep him quiet. They'd tried to murder his brother and a groundskeeper to bury the evidence deeper. The stakes were brutally clear now. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. Buck's head appeared in Rowan's back window, eyes reflecting the emergency lights. He'd known the danger from the start. Now they all understood exactly what they were dealing with, and who they were dealing with. People who would kill to keep their secrets. The storage facility disappeared behind them, but Marin could still taste smoke and fear on her tongue. They were alive, but only barely. And somewhere out there, someone was already planning how to finish what the fire had started. Dawn crept through the grimy windows of the motel room, where Marin, Rowan, and Buck had taken refuge after the fire. The smell of smoke still clung to their clothes, a constant reminder of how close they'd come to death. Marin sat cross-legged on one of the beds, her laptop balanced precariously as she scrolled through the photos they'd taken of Harlan's memo before the storage unit went up in flames. Rowan paced the worn carpet, his fingers running absently over the burn mark on his jacket sleeve. Buck watched him from his spot by the door, the dog's eyes tracking every movement. "Wait." Rowan suddenly stopped pacing. "Go back to that third page." Marin clicked backward through the images. "This one?" "Yeah." He leaned over her shoulder, pointing at a string of numbers. "That serial number. BS04739X. I've seen it before." His voice had taken on an edge that made Marin look up. "Where?" "During the cleanup after Harlan's." He swallowed hard. "After the accident, I helped clear out some of his guard gear. There was this official notice about a recall, something about defective ammunition batches. This exact number was on it." Marin enlarged the image, the pixels blurring slightly. "You're sure?" "Positive. I remember because it seemed weird at the time. The notice said the whole batch had been destroyed months before Harlan's training weekend. But here it is in his notes, dated just 2 weeks before he died." The implications hit Marin like a physical blow. If Brackett reported destroying that batch, but they didn't. Rowan's face had gone pale beneath its stubble. "They repackaged it, sold it right back to the guard for our training exercises, probably at full price, knowing those vultures." Buck whined softly, as if sensing the tension in the room. Marin reached for her notebook, flipping to a clean page. "Okay, let's break this down. We know Harlan was documenting misfires. These dates here, She tapped the screen. They line up with his last 3 training weekends. He would have recorded everything. Rowan ran a hand through his hair. Harlan was methodical like that. Always had his body cam running during exercises, even though it wasn't required. The body cam that supposedly doesn't exist? Marin raised an eyebrow. According to the official report, he wasn't wearing one that day. Because if he was, there'd be evidence. Rowan's voice was bitter. Evidence of exactly what happened when that accidental discharge occurred. Marin started writing, her EMT training kicking in. Document everything. Create a clear chain of facts. So Bracket Solutions recalls defective ammunition, claims to destroy it. Instead, they repack it, sell it back to the guard at full price. Harlan starts noticing problems during training and documenting them. Rowan picked up the thread. He would have had dates, locations, lot numbers, video proof of the misfires. Everything needed to expose not just negligence, but fraud. Fraud that got him killed. Marin's pen pressed hard into the paper. This isn't about protecting reputation anymore. This is criminal. They sold faulty ammunition to soldiers, knowing it could get them killed. And when Harlan threatened to expose it, Rowan couldn't finish the sentence. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ancient heating unit. Buck padded over to Rowan, pressing against his leg in a gesture of comfort. Marin studied her notes, mind racing. We need something concrete, something they can't destroy or deny. The memo helps, but they'll claim it's fake. Rowan nodded. We need physical proof, something with their markings, their batch numbers. The training range. Marin looked up. Would there be shell casings left? Anything from that weekend? Rowan shook his head. They clean those ranges down to the dirt after every exercise. Standard procedure. He paused. But what? The impact zones. Behind the targets there's this big dirt berm. Rounds that miss or malfunction, they end up buried in there. Nobody digs those out. Marin's pulse quickened. And if we found even one fragment with Brackett's markings, we could prove those rounds were fired months after they were supposedly destroyed. Rowan's eyes lit up with the first hope she'd seen since the fire. Plus, if any of them show the kind of defects Harlan was documenting, it corroborates everything in his memo. Marin was already reaching for her boots. We need to get out there. Wait. Rowan held up a hand. After last night, they'll be watching, expecting us to make a move. Which is why we need to be smart about this. Marin pulled up a map on her laptop. The range is on guard property, but it backs up to state forest land. If we come in from behind, we could access the impact zone without crossing any checkpoints. Rowan studied the map. It'll be a hard hike, but doable. Buck's tail wagged once, sensing their renewed purpose. Marin began gathering their scattered evidence into her waterproof bag. We'll need tools, something to dig with, but small enough to carry quietly. I know where we can get supplies. Rowan was already shrugging into his jacket. And I've got a friend who used to work range maintenance. He can tell us exactly where to look for specific training dates. Marin nodded, clicking through one last time to the photo of Harlan's memo. Those neat rows of numbers and dates. His last attempt to protect his fellow soldiers, to expose a deadly fraud. They couldn't let that evidence die with him. We'll need to move fast, she said, closing the laptop. Once they realize we survived the fire, they'll know we have the memo. They'll guess what we're looking for. Then let's not give them time to stop us. Rowan's voice was steel-edged with determination. Harlan died trying to expose this. We owe it to him to finish what he started. Buck stood at attention, every muscle ready. He'd known from the start something was wrong with Harlan's death. Now they understood exactly what and why. Criminal fraud, defective ammunition knowingly sold to soldiers, a cover-up willing to kill to stay hidden. The truth had nearly cost them their lives once already. But as Marin shouldered her bag and checked her phone's signal, she knew they had no choice but to push forward. Somewhere in that impact, Berm lay the physical proof they needed, proof that could rip open Brackett's fraud and expose Harlan's killers. They just had to get to it before someone tried to stop them. Permanently. The evening sun cast long shadows across Sabine Voss's front porch as Marin and Rowan approached. Buck stayed in the car this time. They'd agreed his presence might be too emotionally charged for this conversation. Marin's knock echoed against the wooden door. Through the glass panels, she could see movement inside. Then a pause. Finally, the door opened just enough to reveal Sabine's face, more drawn and tired than at the funeral. "Mrs. Voss," Marin kept her voice gentle. "I'm Marin Kepler from the cemetery. Could we speak with you for a moment?" Sabine's eyes darted between them, then over their shoulders to check the street. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please." Marin stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We know you're scared. We are too. But this is about doing right by Harlan." Something in Sabine's expression cracked at her husband's name. After a long moment, she opened the door wider. "My daughter's at her grandmother's," she said, leading them to a living room where toys were scattered across the floor. She began gathering them automatically, hands shaking slightly. "We can help protect you," Marin said, settling into an armchair while Rowan remained standing. "But we need to understand what happened with the funeral arrangements." Sabine's movements stilled. "I did what they told me to do. For Emily's sake." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Who told you?" Marin pressed gently. "Mr. Crane." Sabine nodded, sinking onto the couch. "He called that night. Said there were procedures for military deaths. Special arrangements." Her hands twisted in her lap. "He was so insistent about keeping the casket closed, about doing everything quickly." "Did he mention Brackett Solutions?" Rowan asked. Sabine's head snapped up, fear flickering across her face. "How did you—" "We know they were involved," Marin said. "We just need you to help us understand how." Sabine stood abruptly, crossing to a desk in the corner. She returned with her phone, fingers trembling as she pulled up messages. "It started with this." Marin took the phone, Rowan reading over her shoulder. The texts from Crane were carefully worded but clear in their pressure. Suggestions about avoiding complications and protecting the family's interests. References to our mutual friends at Brackett who could ensure proper arrangements. "The transfer happened at night," Sabine continued, her voice hollow. "A private ambulance, Brackett's logo on the side. They said it was standard procedure, but—" She wrapped her arms around herself. "Nothing felt standard." "Did they make any direct threats?" Marin asked. Sabine shook her head. "Not exactly, but there were comments about Emily's college fund, about how Brackett takes care of military families." Her voice cracked. "I knew something was wrong, but I was so scared. Emily's all I have left." Marin moved to sit beside her on the couch. "You were protecting your daughter. No one can blame you for that." "But Harlan—" Tears spilled down Sabine's cheeks. "He always said do what's right, no matter what. I failed him." "You haven't failed anyone," Marin said firmly. "You're talking to us now. That's what matters." Rowan pulled out his phone. "I'm texting Deputy Collins. He can arrange protection for you and Emily right away." Sabine's eyes widened. "Protection?" "There was an incident last night," Marin explained carefully. "We have reason to believe Brackett will go to extreme lengths to keep this quiet, but the deputy and the medical examiner are already involved. They can help keep you safe while we expose the truth." "The truth?" Sabine's voice was small. About how Harlan really died? Marin shared a look with Rowan before answering. We believe Harlan discovered something dangerous, something Brackett wanted buried with him. Your testimony about Crane's involvement, these messages, they help prove this wasn't just a tragic accident. Sabine was quiet for a long moment, staring at a family photo on the wall. Harlan in uniform, Emily on his shoulders, both laughing. Finally, she turned back to them. What do you need me to do? First, we need copies of all communication with Crane, Marin said. Then a formal statement about the funeral arrangements and transfer. They'll know it was me, Sabine whispered. Not until we have everything else in place, Rowan assured her. By then you and Emily will be somewhere safe. Sabine nodded slowly, then stood and walked to a cabinet. She returned with a manila envelope. I kept everything. The texts, emails, paperwork from that night. Even the business card from the Brackett representative. She handed it to Marin. I knew. I think I always knew I'd need them someday. Marin squeezed her hand. You did the right thing, Mrs. Voss. This helps more than you know. They spent the next hour documenting everything. The late-night calls, the rushed paperwork, the specific demands about the closed casket. Sabine's hands steadied as she spoke, as if each word lifted a weight from her shoulders. When Deputy Collins arrived, he brought a female officer who would stay with Sabine until safe housing was arranged. As they prepared to leave, Sabine caught Marin's arm. Harlan kept saying something was wrong at work, she said. The last few weeks he was so worried. Should have pushed harder. Should have made him tell me. He was protecting you too, Marin said gently. Just like you protected Emily. But now we can protect his truth. Sabine hugged herself, looking suddenly young and lost. Will you let me know? When it's over? You have my word, Marin promised. Outside, the street was quiet as they walked to their car. Buck's tail thumped against the seat as they got in, his presence a steady comfort. Crane's going to panic when he realizes Sabine kept those records, Rowan said as they pulled away. Marin nodded, the manila envelope heavy in her lap. Good. A panicked man makes mistakes. And right now we need Crane to make one big enough to crack this whole thing open? The pieces were finally falling into place. Harlan's discovery, Brackett's cover-up, Crane's complicity in rushing the burial. Each connection made the picture clearer and darker. But with Sabine's evidence, they had what they needed to start pulling threads until the whole truth unraveled. They just had to stay alive long enough to use it. Marin's phone buzzed just after 7 in the morning. The message made her blood run cold. Notice, per facility policy, unclaimed remains of Staff Sergeant H. Voss scheduled for standard cremation procedure today at 1000 hours. No, she whispered, then immediately dialed Rowan. He picked up on the first ring. Did you get it? His voice was tight with anger. I did. They're trying to destroy any evidence we missed. Marin was already grabbing her keys. Meet me at Peaceful Valley Crematory in 30 minutes. Bring Buck. What's the plan? We work within the law, she said firmly. The medical examiner's order gives us authority to document and preserve evidence. We use that window before they can finish the job. The morning air was crisp as Marin pulled into the crematory's back lot. Rowan's truck was already there, Buck sitting alert in the passenger seat. The building looked innocent enough. Red brick, well-maintained landscaping, discreet signage. But Marin knew what lay inside. Industrial furnaces that could reach 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to destroy any trace of Brackett's involvement. Rowan met her at the service entrance, Buck padding silently beside him. Security cameras? 2 visible ones, Marin pointed. But they're aimed at the main entrance and loading dock. This door's blind spot. She pulled out her phone and brought up the medical examiner's documentation. "Remember, we have legal right to be here. Just stay calm and professional." The service door opened with a soft click. Standard issue. Nothing fancy. Inside, the prep corridor was cool and quiet. Their footsteps echoed on the polished concrete floor as they moved past supply closets and empty gurneys. "Cremation chambers at the end," Marin whispered. "Listen." A low hum filled the air, the sound of preheating elements warming up. Buck's ears twitched at the noise. They found Harlan's remains in the staging area, still in the same casket. A clipboard hung nearby with routing papers and timestamps. Marin photographed everything while Rowan stood watch. "Chambers at 400 degrees, he reported, checking the digital display. "Climbing steady." Marin nodded, already focused on her inspection. Her EMT training helped her work systematically, checking seams, creases, anywhere something small might have been overlooked during embalming. The chemical sweetness she'd noticed at the funeral lingered, stronger now in the enclosed space. "Here." Rowan carefully opened the uniform jacket, fingers finding the inner breast pocket. "Harlan always kept important things here, said it was closest to his heart." The pocket was empty, but Marin noticed something catching the light along the seam. She leaned closer, using her phone's flashlight. "There's metallic residue ground into the fabric," she said, "like something got crushed or embedded." She carefully photographed the traces, making sure to capture the uniform's serial number tag for scale reference. Buck suddenly growled, low in his throat. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. "Quick," Marin whispered. They slipped into a supply alcove. Buck pressed close against their legs. A worker passed by, checking gauges and making notes. The temperature display now read 600 degrees. Time was running out. When the coast was clear, they returned to their examination. Marin's fingers found something hard near the collar, a small metal fragment wedged into the fabric weave. Using tweezers from her evidence kit, she carefully extracted it. "Look," she breathed. Even under the harsh fluorescent lights, the fragment's stamped numbers were visible. "This could be from the defective batch." Rowan pulled out his phone, comparing the fragment to their photos of Harlan's memo. "Serial range matches. This ties directly back to Brackett's recalled munitions." The chamber's heat was becoming noticeable now, making the air thick and uncomfortable. Buck pawed anxiously at the floor. "We need to move," Marin said, securing the fragment in an evidence bag. "Temperature's getting dangerous." They worked quickly to return everything exactly as they'd found it, wiping away any trace of their presence. The chamber reading had climbed past 800 degrees. Just as they reached the service door, voices approached from the main entrance. They pressed themselves against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. 2 sets of footsteps passed, accompanied by fragments of conversation. "Rush job, straight from corporate. Paperwork's all set, just need to..." When the voices faded, they slipped out into the morning sun. Buck immediately shook himself, as if throwing off the building's oppressive atmosphere. In the parking lot, Marin carefully labeled the evidence bag while Rowan kept watch. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. They'd come so close to losing this crucial piece of proof. "We need to get this to the medical examiner right away," she said, securing the bag in her jacket pocket. "And warn Sabine they're accelerating their timeline." Rowan nodded grimly. "They're getting desperate. That makes them dangerous." "But it also makes them sloppy," Marin replied. "They didn't count on anyone checking this closely, this quickly." The fragment felt impossibly small against her ribs, yet its weight was enormous. This tiny piece of metal could unravel everything: the fraudulent resale, the cover-up, the truth about Harlan's death. No wonder they'd tried to literally burn the evidence. Buck's tail wagged once, decisive, as if he knew they'd found what they were looking for. In a way, Marin thought, he had led them here. His instincts at the funeral starting the chain that brought them to this moment. They separated quickly, taking different routes to avoid being followed. The morning traffic was picking up as Marin pulled onto the main road, her precious cargo secure against her side. In her rearview mirror, the crematory's brick walls looked almost peaceful in the rising sun. But she knew better now, knew how close they'd come to losing the last piece of Harlan's truth to those hungry flames. The fragment might be small, but combined with Sabine's testimony and their other evidence, it created a chain that led straight back to Brackett Solutions. Now they just had to make sure that chain held strong enough to bring justice for Harlan and safety for those he'd left behind. Working with careful precision, Rowan's weathered hands traced along the uniform's inner lining. His fingers trembled slightly as they caught on something solid, a small protrusion near the shoulder seam. "Marin," he whispered, his voice tight with anticipation. "I've got something here." Marin leaned in closer, directing her phone's flashlight beam onto the spot. The metallic glint was unmistakable, a fragment no larger than a fingernail embedded in the fabric. Using tweezers from her evidence collection kit, she helped Rowan gently work it free. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, the metal piece told its story clearly. Despite its small size, the stamped numbers along one edge were perfectly legible. Rowan's breath caught as he compared them to the photos of Harlan's memo on his phone. "This is it," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Batch code matches exactly. These are the recalled rounds Brackett tried to hide." Marin quickly pulled an evidence pouch from her kit, carefully documenting the time and location of recovery on its label. Her EMT training kicked in. Maintaining precise records was second nature. She sealed the fragment inside while Rowan recorded video of the process on his phone. "We need witnesses," Marin said, double-checking the seal. "And cameras. Multiple angles when we hand this over." She pulled out her phone and began typing a message to the deputy they trusted. "Found conclusive evidence linking Brackett. Rounds. Need immediate presence for formal handoff. At crematory. Please hurry." The message sent with a soft whoosh. Marin checked the temperature display, 750 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing steadily. The chamber's automated cycle was advancing, but they still had a workable window, just enough time to wait for official witness and documentation. Buck sat alert nearby, his ears pricked forward. The evidence pouch felt impossibly light in Marin's hand, yet she knew its contents carried the weight of truth. The physical proof connecting Harlan's death directly to Brackett's fraudulent ammunition scheme. "This is what Harlan was trying to expose," Rowan said quietly, staring at the sealed pouch. He knew they were putting lives at risk, repackaging defective rounds. His hands clenched into fists, and they silenced him for it. The victory felt tentative, but real. They had an authenticated artifact, a documented chain of custody, and Sabine's corroborating testimony about the rushed burial. The pieces were finally falling into place. The chamber's heat was becoming more noticeable now, raising the temperature in the prep room degree by degree. Marin checked her phone. No response yet from the deputy. She calculated their remaining margin of safety, factoring in response time and proper documentation needs. "We should have about 20 minutes before," she began. The sound of the door opening cut her off mid-sentence. The metallic creak echoed through the prep room, followed by approaching footsteps. Buck's ears flattened against his head, a low growl building in his throat. The temperature continued its steady climb as they stood frozen, the evidence pouch clutched tightly in Marine's hand, waiting to see who would appear around the corner. The deputy's confirmation still hadn't come through. The chamber cycle advanced another notch. Their careful plans were about to collide with an unexpected variable, and time was no longer on their side. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the soft rustle of fabric. Marin felt the weight of the evidence pouch against her palm, knowing they couldn't risk losing it now, not when they were so close to exposing the truth about Harlan's death. 800 degrees Fahrenheit glowed on the digital display. The prep room's air grew thicker with each passing second. And still the footsteps approached, measured and deliberate, about to turn the corner into their section of the room. Colonel Royce Daltrey's polished shoes clicked against the concrete floor as he rounded the corner, flanked by two burly men in dark security uniforms. His corporate charm had vanished, replaced by cold efficiency. "I believe you have something that belongs to us," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Before Marin could react, one guard seized Rowan, twisting his arm behind his back and relieving him of his phone. The other advanced on Marin, but Buck had already slipped, away through a narrow service hatch in the wall. Daltrey produced a key card, backing Marin toward the loading bay. With practiced movements, he swiped it through the reader. The heavy door whirred open, and Marin found herself shoved inside. The sharp smell of chemicals filled her nostrils as Daltrey methodically splashed accelerant across the floor. "Another tragic accident," he said, his voice eerily calm. "The stress of losing her friend, perhaps? Or simple carelessness with flammable materials?" A bright orange flash erupted overhead as the accelerant caught. Flames licked across the ceiling in a deadly dance. Marin's training kicked in. She grabbed a nearby fire blanket, ignoring the searing pain as she smothered the initial flashover. The flesh of her arm blistered from the heat. The building's fire alarms began their piercing wail. Marin slapped the emergency ventilation controls, knowing the sudden airflow would draw attention. Black smoke billowed through the newly opened vents. Buck reappeared like a ghost, his military training evident as he charged the nearest guard. The man stumbled backward, his grip on Rowan loosening. Daltrey lunged for the evidence pouch, but Marin was already moving. She used the loading bay's layout to maintain distance, ducking behind equipment as the alarms screamed overhead. The heat was becoming unbearable, but she clutched the fragment tight. She wouldn't let them erase Harlan twice. 850 degrees glowed on the chamber display as smoke filled the room. Every second she kept the fragment from Daltrey was another second closer to help arriving. The colonel's face twisted with rage as she evaded another grab. Through the haze of smoke, Marin spotted the control panel for the crematory's security system. Her fingers flew across the keypad, redirecting the internal camera feeds to stream directly to the county oversight server. Every movement would be recorded, preserved beyond anyone's reach to delete or alter. "It's all live now," she called out to Rowan, her voice hoarse from the smoke. Rowan managed to free one hand, fumbling for his backup phone tucked into his boot. His fingers shaking, he pressed the emergency contact for the deputy they trusted. Buck remained focused on his target, his training evident in every movement. The German shepherd's hackles were raised, teeth bared, as he kept one of Daltrey's guards pinned against the wall. The man didn't dare move, recognizing the military-trained dog's lethal potential. Daltrey made another desperate lunge for the evidence pouch, but this time Rowan was ready. He launched himself forward, tackling the colonel with all his strength. Both men crashed to the floor, suits covered in accelerant and ash. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the chaos. Marin's hands were steady as she retrieved a steel lockbox from the supply cabinet. The fragment, their precious proof of Brackett's lethal fraud, clinked against the metal as she secured it. Inside. The deputy burst through the door, weapon drawn, just as Marin placed the lockbox in plain view on a clean steel table. Everything was perfectly positioned. The evidence in clear sight, the security cameras recording, multiple witnesses present, and a clear chain of custody about to be established. Colonel Daltrey attempted to destroy evidence in an ongoing investigation, Marin stated clearly for the camera's benefit. This fragment connects directly to Brackett Solutions' recalled ammunition batch. The color drained from Daltrey's face as he watched his carefully constructed wall of deniability crumble. No amount of corporate influence or military authority could override the methodically documented proof now being logged into evidence. The deputy began the formal seizure process, reading out serial numbers and timestamps, while his body camera recorded every detail. The case was no longer just their word against Brackett's. It was now preserved in multiple systems, witnessed and documented beyond any single person's ability to erase. In the weeks that followed, justice moved with deliberate speed. Federal indictments hit Brackett Solutions like thunderbolts, charging executives with criminal negligence and fraud. Luther Crane surrendered his funeral director's license after state investigators uncovered his role in the cover-up. Sabine Voss found her courage, providing detailed sworn statements about the pressure she'd faced. The deputy arranged witness protection for her and her daughter, ensuring they could rebuild their lives without fear of retaliation. In his brother's memory, Rowan channeled his grief into advocacy, working with veteran groups to reform military procurement processes. Harlan always said the truth matters most when it costs something, he told Marin one afternoon. At the cemetery, Marin's arm healed slowly beneath clean bandages. She filed adoption papers for Buck, who'd become her constant companion. The German shepherd's alert presence reminded her daily of how his instincts had saved them all. Staff Sergeant Harlan Voss received the burial he deserved, open, honest, and attended by those who'd fought to honor his sacrifice. The military honor guard performed their ritual with precise dignity, and this time, the ceremony felt true. After the second service, Marin and Rowan stood beside Harlan's grave. Buck sat at attention between them, his gray muzzle lifted proudly. "Thank you," Rowan said quietly, "for believing when no one else would." Marin touched the fresh bandage on her arm. "Some lines need crossing," she replied, "especially when they're crossed together." They shared a moment of comfortable silence, united by the knowledge that they'd done right by Harlan's memory. Their unlikely alliance had become something more, a friendship forged in the pursuit of truth, tempered by shared danger and strengthened by unwavering moral purpose. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.